Star Citizen 1.0 is not anywhere near being released, and that's not why it's being talked about at CitizenCon this year. This is just like the back-end roadmap presentation at CitizenCon 2018. You know, the one where they said org tools were coming. There's a reason this panel is scheduled as the last one of the weekend, being the most important outside of Squadron 42. It will set our long-term expectations for the game, but more importantly, it will start to inform players of the direction this game is going in. From engineering to Death of a Spaceman to why in the world these cities even exist. But what we hear is going to be equal parts exciting and disappointing for many of us, and almost nobody will be walking away completely satisfied, because at the end of the day, this game isn't being built for any one person. So let's talk about what to look out for with Star Citizen 1.0, and how to set our expectations. Thank you for coming to my Tomato Talk. First things first, what we are playing right now isn't Star Citizen. It's not even close. This game has so far to go before it's really a game. Recent changes like engine optimizations, cargo interaction, flight model updates, and engineering are starting to introduce the intended game, but we have a lot of progress to make. When you spawn into the game right now, I'm sure getting all your gear, going from your apartment to your ship, and flying out to orbit before starting your gameplay feels like a waste. But that's because storing everything on board and logging on and off from your ship isn't standard procedure just yet. It's also because building interiors haven't fleshed out cities with simple tasks and missions to do without a spaceship. Mission givers aren't scattered around these places giving you somebody to meet. There aren't even enough contracts in the game to provide you with consistent gameplay around a planet. Personnel transport isn't an option for players or NPCs to be shipped to other destinations without flying their own ships. AI-controlled ships don't provide a higher number of targets for pirates to attack. Materials that are mined and salvaged have no value to players aside from their ability to be sold. Death has no meaning, making backspace the most valuable key on a citizen's keyboard. Hell, there are too many glitches and problems with instability to even consider consequences for making bad decisions and dying anyways. These things are simply not functioning how they're meant to. Star Citizen is a tech demo, not a game. The Alpha 1.0 introduced the Arena Commander module along with some other small additions. Alpha 2.0 gave us the persistent universe in an area that focused on Port Olisar and the space around it in Crusader's orbit. At these points, that game really had no direction. It struggled to give players insight into what it would become. It didn't even have planets to land on, but it offered entertainment and something to do. In Alpha 3.0, this shifted. It didn't change, but it absolutely shifted. And for the last 24 major updates on the 3.0 branch of updates, the game has started to show itself slightly, just a little bit. But all this time, still, the priority of the game felt like it was just to distract players, keep them busy, keep them spending money, keep them interested in the project. But until things were ready, until the game engine could support the development of an actual game, and Squadron 42 could be made and released, features have been added in iterations just enough to make them work, just enough to provide an initial implementation that proved the tech could be used at some point. Like, look at refueling. It's definitely going to work different, but right now, it simply just kinda works. But that's just not good enough, and neither is the state of the PU or the messaging behind it at this point. As we step into 4.0, server meshing becomes the back-end driving force of the game, and development begins to shift from Squadron 42. The idea of Star Citizen is starting to shift more towards the actual game being made, rather than just the tech and the game engine behind it. Yes, I know, it's taken a long time to get here. I'm about as happy about it as anybody else, but it is what it is. This is where we are. They weren't really trying to build Star Citizen the game up until now, I think. But now that it's a more achievable goal, it's time they laid out what the heck Star Citizen the game actually is. Because what we're playing now isn't even close. And when they describe it, there will be a lot of disappointment mixed in with the joy of what that means for Star Citizen. Here, in my opinion, are some of the key points I think we should look out for when considering what may be described for Star Citizen 1.0 at CitizenCon, and what questions could see some answers. One of the more important parts of Star Citizen 1.0 that need to and possibly will be discussed this weekend is insurance. A long-running incentive to spend fresh money on ships in-game and buy cheaper items to add benefits onto your later pledges. Insurance is one of the least understood parts of the game, in no small part because it hasn't really been thoroughly explained. But if players are expected to know whether they can lose their ship, how long their ship may take to return, or whether their own components, weapons, items, hangars, bases, and other loot can be easily reacquired based on insurance, then CIG needs to bring this aspect of the game to light. Similarly, death in-game has always been expected to truly matter, with the respawn system linked to an idea of cycling through many lives per se until you eventually lose your character, pay some form of inheritance tax, and take a small reputation hit. Star Citizen could take a page out of the Souls-like games and make dying a more intense event, of course after the game is further stabilized. But as changes like the respawn mechanics and a slightly more casual focus than what was presented a decade ago are revealed, questions swirl. And while the lore and fairly recent messaging still supports the idea that players will want to pay closer attention to how death works, this is an aspect of the game that some even watching this video may be hearing about for the first time. CIG needs to lay down clear expectations of what kind of game players will be involved in, and the inherent risks, because it may be the case that Arena Commander and Squadron 42 are games that are more up many players' alleys. What will the economy look like? We've seen many presentations about the quantum simulation, now known as StarSim, but now that server meshing is somewhat functional and the game is hopefully being developed in a more finalized manner, what are the realistic goals behind the economy? How much will player bases and shops factor into supply and demand, and what can players do on a macro scale to affect the flow of goods? Contracts have always been the way to play Star Citizen outside of sandbox gameplay, but mission givers were where the truly narrative-focused, more in-depth mission chains would take place. From the factions across the game, to the governments controlling players, to the gang leaders and companies' CEOs that may be seeking out your help, how will missions be acquired? Where will they take place? And what sort of storyline could Star Citizen feature? And while CitizenCon will be explaining the star systems coming after Pyro, there's still an entire star map that players can look at and wonder how much of it they'll actually see. Short of that, what are the plans for the starting game? Are we looking at a mixture of high and low security systems? Is Terra going to make an appearance by 1.0? And what will be the reasons for players to even choose different systems? How does the game expand, and why? Earlier this year, I talked about how CIG may be stifling what players call griefing, while encouraging levels of piracy. The conversation surrounding this topic depends on what law systems are put in place in the game and the security that enforces them. One of the biggest deciding factors for many players is whether or not they can play in an area that provides them with reliable safety, or at the very least, an intense enough deterrent to allow it. CIG has been open about their plans here, and you can check out my video from earlier this year to learn more about what they have to say about it. But this is an opportunity to lay down the definitive stance on how players can expect to travel throughout the game, and where they may want to stay to ensure the gameplay they are looking for. And gameplay is the most important thing they can address here. We've seen how some professions have developed over time, but things could change after Squadron 42, and CIG may have much bigger plans than what they are willing to say in their weekly videos. There are thousands of hours worth of videos, text, and design documents published to explain the direction and goals for career paths in the game. From mining to repair to personnel transport to engineering to cargo hauling. These documents and videos contain more information than any one person can gather and remember. CIG needs to make it clear just what the goals are for specific types of gameplay, the difficulty they involve, and the depth they should provide. Can a player easily pick up the profession but then spend the next 1,000 hours perfecting it? What might be the difference between taking part in that gameplay solo versus in a group? And most importantly, how much of that gameplay do you want to deliver by Star Citizen 1.0 versus in subsequent updates after release? This and all the other questions I've listed here are only scratching the surface of what I think CIG could deliver more definitive messaging on. Because for a long time now, millions of players have been able to look at Star Citizen, follow its development, and imagine the game it's going to be. And if you spend some time in the community, you'll find that many people disagree on that. Many of the things we hear during this panel, I think, will be disappointing to people in different ways. So be prepared for disappointment as reality is laid out, but also be prepared for hopefully a bit more clarity on where things are headed as Squadron 42 gets out of the way and Star Citizen gains some more focus. Because despite any disappointment, this should at least provide some direction. And despite everything we've seen of the development, CIG has never made the full direction of the game clear in one singular place that players can refer to in order to gain some idea of the goal of Star Citizen. Possibly because they haven't even known themselves yet. And now is their big chance. The one thing I think they should not say here is a date. And I really hope they don't set any time-related goals for this. It could be 2 years, it could be 6. But they shouldn't say either way in my opinion. Just like in 2018 when server meshing was set out as the goal to achieve without a date, Star Citizen 1.0 should simply be the direction of the development, not a timed goal. But I'd love to hear what else you want to know about the commercial release idea of Star Citizen. I'm sure many don't think it'll ever happen, and I'm sure many more disagree with what I've said here, but I'm curious either way. What's something you want to see clarified regarding the finished game? And are you ready for some hard truths regarding 1.0? Let me know down below, and if you'd like, come join us for our CitizenCon watch party on Saturday and Sunday. We'll be hosting our own community bingo where you can win a game package and a ship. We'll be giving away multiple items, calling into folks on the show floor to tell us their thoughts, and talking in between panels about what's going on. I hope you learned something new in this video, and I'll catch you in the next.